This is Good Morning Britain with Susanna Reid and Richard Madeley.
Morning to you both.
Morning.
The other big story on several front pages this morning is this thing about net zero. It was the Conservatives in 2019 who put net zero into law. They said it had to happen by 2050. Everybody said, OK, yeah, we can do that. 6 years later, it's the Conservatives who are now saying that that's an impossible dream and it would ruin us. Do we think that Keir Starmer secretly agrees with Kemi Badenoch on this?
Well, if he does, he'll have a huge cabinet resignation in the form of Ed Miliband, the Climate Change Energy Secretary, who's almost like a zealot on this policy. No, I don't think... if he does privately, there's going to be no Labour change. This is Kemi Badenoch jumping ahead of her own policy review. They're announcing a major review of policy today. I think people will be relieved because it is unrealistic.
But is she right when she says that there's no plan? I mean, that's her fundamental point. She says we cannot see any kind of plan to get us to net zero by 2050. It's just a kind of a pious hope.
When she was business secretary, she was implementing a plan, and that was all cars going to be at electric or dual electric and
she said she
fuel.
spoke against it when it was discussed in the Commons.
She was implementing it when she was business secretary, right. and the car industry isn't a problem now because if they don't set, I think it's 28% of cars. If you're a manufacturer, and 28%, I think it's 28% of the cars you sell on electric, you get hit with huge fines. That was her policy. So I think. I'm just laughing at her because she's thrashing. She's thrashing. Getting electricity produced by renewable sources will make it cheaper in the long run and more secure.
Yes,
not just the environment, but it is better. We've got to get off. We've got to get off oil and gas.
But Kevin, your point
prohibitively expensive now.
The long term.
Exactly.
It's all, the long term. Currently, we face pressure right now. I just want to.
25 years is long term.
Yeah.
Look.
Yeah. Yes.
Your
exactly.
mum's trying to pay her energy bills. Right now, she's not interested in net zero.
So let me put to you what Kemi Badenoch says, because it's important. She says she doesn't say it with any pleasure. She doesn't have some ideological desire to dismantle it, and that we must do what we can to improve our natural world. But she says, I says this because anyone who's done any serious analysis knows net zero 2050 can't be achieved without a serious drop in our living standards or by bankrupting us. Yeah. And I wonder whether she's shining a light that Ed Miliband perhaps is accused of not shining, which is that the long-term efforts are going to require so much money now that the threat from Russia and what's happened in Ukraine and where we get our energy from is putting an enormous financial pressure on us when we do have North Sea oil, of course, and we know that licenses...
Most of it's pumped out. Production is a lot lower than it used to be. The reason our electricity bills soared, our power bills soared, and the government then had to spend a fortune on subsidising consumption, while we also suffered at the same time, is because we rely on gas and oil. They are internationally traded, and somebody like Putin, acting the way he did in Ukraine, can send those prices soaring, and that hurts us. The price of solar and wind power didn't go up. The production costs didn't rise when he invaded Ukraine because they're produced here in the UK. It's why it is sensible.
Nonsense.
It is absolute sensible.
You're not thinking about hard-up families who simply can't afford to pay their electric and gas bills now. All these green taxes are whacked on every month, and it's going to get worse. Hang on, Kevin. It's going to get worse and
You're
worse.
A flat earther.
Higher and higher bills, all because of some ideological race to be the first to get to net
she's been
zero
accused this morning
You're a flat earther.
Playing to the gallery, but can you play to the gallery and be right at the same time?
She is talking about hard-up families who are struggling with their energy bills, and it's going to get much more expensive because of his obsession with net zero and Ed Miliband's obsession with net zero.
Do you think net zero is possible by 2050?
Probably not, no.
Game over.
The Conservatives enshrined it in law.
Well, they were wrong to.
But you aim for it. It is very, very sensible to get off these carbon fuels. These carbon fuels are why people are struggling with their bills, because it's so expensive. You're missing missing the
Hang on,
entire
hang on.
point.
If you know
yet
that you
again.
can't hit the target, you've just accepted, if you know you can't hit 2050, then surely it's realistic to reassess the target.
Yeah, but, but if you get to 90%, you're almost there, and it'll be better for us. Not just the environment, it'll be better for us in our pockets.
25
It will be
years
better
of rising
financially.
energy, electric and gas bills, so he and his mates can say, we've hit the green target
It's
first.
not that
It's an
at all.
obsession. It
Yeah,
is.
but
They
even
are
Kevin
not
says we're not
yeah.
going to fit that, reach that green target. It's a Kemi Badenoch says it's a multi-trillion, 30-year project touching every aspect of our lives, and it was decided in 90 minutes without a vote.
Has she produced...
Was it democratic?
Has she produced what the cost is now of gas and oil production? You know, she's getting a cost of something, one thing, but she's not costing carrying on as we are. People are struggling to pay their bills now because you get... One, the industry's broken, it's privatised, and that was terrible, and it's real profiteering, and a lot of that goes abroad because our electricity companies aren't all just owned in Britain. And the second is we are on an international fuel, oil and gas, which soars when there are international events.
And when
if
it's
you
not
produce
windy,
your
the wind
electricity in
turbines
Britain,
don't work. When it's not sunny, the solar farms that are despoiling the countryside up and down. He's laughing. This costs people.
I am, because
this costs
I mean,
good working class homes. His lot used to support lots of money.
The key thing is how many people will support Kemi Badenoch saying this.
It'll be very popular.
Well, because they'll follow the ignorance. I mean, that's it. You've got to make the argument. You've got to make the argument, and you make it financially.
I'm sorry you can't afford your bill because we're going to get to that green target.
Is it partly a result of Trumpian politics? You know, the drill, baby, drill thing. Is his influence influencing the Conservative Party on energy?
Rishi Sunak admitted in a rare interview the other day they were wrong to have gone for this net zero. It was a mistake. He said the same.
Yes, he did say
so.
that,
As a lot of Tories are now looking back and thinking, we got it completely wrong. Theresa May and Boris were behind all of this.
It's not Trump, it's Farage. That's what she's worried about. She's, again, looking to the right of her party on everything from migration to energy to so-called woke issues. She's freaked out by him. Yesterday, he unveiled 29 councillors that have defected. None of them standing in by-elections, as I could see, but he's got 29 councillors have defected. They've defected over a period of time. Most of them had been announced. But anyway, put them all together. Almost all of them were Conservatives.
Well, I think
that's what that is all about.
I think we've agreed here that Trump, Putin is part of the equation here and the costs of the Ukraine war. So let's move on to that. Very interesting, off-the-cuff, as per usual, comments from Donald Trump on Air Force One yesterday, where he seemed basically, if you take what he says at face value, to be telling us that him and Putin have pretty much stitched up a deal to carve up Ukraine, dividing up certain assets. I mean, that must make Zelensky's skin crawl.
It's an acknowledgement that Zelensky's lost the war, and when the ceasefire is done, that Russia are going to keep an awful lot of the territory that they've stolen at gunpoint.
It's a sweetheart deal between two authoritarian white nationalists, just carving up another country. I mean, it's despicable.
And he's talked to Putin, and Putin will go to... It looks like there will be a ceasefire. Look, we all want there's dying to stop, of course we do.
So do you think today's phone call is just a formality, that basically...
Feels like it.
All the work's been done?
Feels like it.
But normally happens in negotiations.
And was Ukraine even consulted about the divvying up of the land? I'm not sure.
It's quite extraordinary for President Trump, an American president, to be talking about this as if it's about him and Russia, it's about him and Putin, not we're going to tell President Putin this was an outrageous, illegal action. We need him to withdraw before we can even consider a peace deal. We want to make sure that this never happens again, that the east of Europe is protected from his aggression. No, we're carving up the assets. We're going to make a deal over land and decide what happens to power plants.
This isn't about Ukraine or even Russia in a sense. It's again about his mantra, America first, because it means he'll be spending less money, pumping less money into Ukraine, and they then get their hands on some of the mineral resources. So, again, America first. That's what's driving this policy.
We're seeing the birth of a new era of American imperialism, in which just big power with another big power, right, just carve up that country. There we are. We know what he said about Canada, wants it to be the 51st state. One of the reasons Greenland he wants. Panama around the canal, but Panama's a country. We saw Trump Gaza. They've just force evict 2 million people and take it over.
Turn it into a
I mean,
resort.
it's sickening. And he's flipped the US from who were an ally of democracies around the world. They also suck up to some dictatorships, as Britain does, the Saudis and so on. And we're now seeing he's just joining
Compare and contrast
the dictators' club.
The French leader, Emmanuel Macron's post, enough deaths, enough lives destroyed, enough destruction, the guns must fall silent. And David Lammy, our Foreign Secretary, Putin should agree to a full and unconditional ceasefire now, and told MPs he'd seen no sign that Putin was serious about a peace deal. But these are voices just sort of sound like distant echoes, don't they?
They're not at the table.
Aren't
They are.
Completely
They are.
irrelevant.
It's the president decides.
Of course, it must make Trump's silence on condemning Putin and what Putin did, it puts it into complete context when we know, as you've just said, that he's actually quite serious about annexing Greenland. He's quite serious about incorporating Canada into the United States. So it makes it impossible for him, doesn't it, to condemn what Putin's done, because without actually firing guns, he's following the same kind of track.
Well, he likes authoritarians. I mean, look, he had an attempted coup 4 years ago in the US himself. He failed, then he gets elected. This is not a man committed to freedom and democracy. He might talk about free speech, it just means his speech. If you're in America and you want to talk about gay rights or women's rights or anything, you'll soon get shouted down and blocked. No, it's kind of sickening.
I do think Canada's fascinating because we saw the new Canadian President seeing the King yesterday.
Yes,
and there is
Palace.
talk that the King could go to Canada and open the Canadian Parliament. Now, the Queen did that. He is King of Canada. How significant would that be? How outraged would Donald Trump be? And how difficult would that again make the state visit here?
We're kind
because he's whacking huge sanctions on Canada, tariffs.
Tariffs.
And Canada is part of the Commonwealth.
Part of the Commonwealth.
And our king is leader of the Commonwealth.
Effectively, Canada is the number 2 realm after the United Kingdom for the king. So it's going to make all that very interesting. And if he does go to Canada to open the Parliament, massive.
But we can play in the...
And that would be with his backing of the British government.
Playing the king card was Starmer's Trump card when he saw Trump himself.
Maybe played it too early.
Yeah, but it's got its limits. We saw Thatcher and Reagan were real buddies in the 1980s, and yet the US invaded Grenada, a Commonwealth country, without telling Thatcher.
Of course.
So, Trump has
to stand for election again. He can't stand for election again in 4 years' time.
Unless he amends the Constitution.
Unless he amends the Constitution. But then, of course, he'll be an old man.
And who would put that past him?
Well, quite.
But then he'll be a very old man. I mean, he'll be well into his 80s. What I was going to ask you is, are we just seeing a blip in American politics? Will it return to some kind of normality? Or is this new autocratic America a fixed state now?
Well, it depends if J.D. Vance gets himself elected.
I think he does not want America involved in any foreign conflicts because what
Too expensive.
Too expensive. There weren't any in his first term, and I think that's the mantra. And it's America first, and it's defining everything.
Yeah, there's a big isolationist streak in America, and it's been before the World Wars. It was dominant, although they always wanted control of South America, so as their backyard. But this isn't being isolationist. This is trying to remould the world in a way that suits him at any time, and a lot of it seems whimsical.
Let's move back to domestic politics, because today, of course, the day that we finally find out what's going to happen with benefits after all of the sort of pre-leaking so that the government could find out what people thought of the proposals. But on the same day that we find out, we're also discovering that thousands of taxpayer-funded credit cards, these are government department credit cards, are going to be cancelled under plans to crack down on wasteful spending. I think people will be really shocked. I mean, of course, you need to have a credit card if you're going to buy stuff to do with government business. But more than £675 million was spent on cards by central departments and agencies last year, up from 155 million in 2020-2021. Why has spending increased so much? Including 2,500 spent by UK diplomats at a women's shoe shop in Barbados. I mean, how many pairs of shoes?
Who is Imelda Markov's back alive and kicking?
£2,500. £1,200 on luxury coffee pods by one team in 2 months. And we know that Lisa Nandy's department spent almost £1,200 on 2 red folders. Apparently they're available in the House of Commons shop for 30 quid. So I don't know why you have to spend £1,200 on 2 red folders.
Of our money.
Well, that's the point. It's our money.
money.
It's reckless and feckless. It's shocking, isn't it?
You've got to,
It's shocking.
If you're in public office, you've got to treat public funds, taxpayers' funds...
But it's not their money.
...carefully. No, you've got to treat it carefully. That's what you have to do, and it brings the whole system into disrepute.
Yeah, when they're
I get it. Why...
Disabled people are going to have their benefits cut,
No.
and yet they can find £2,000...
Yep.
What, how many £1,000 on shoes?
£2,500.
How is that going to make
600
somebody
quid a folder when you can get them for 30 quid.
Yeah.
I mean, so you can have 20 of these folders, or you can have one of this one.
But can I ask why any civil servant thinks it's appropriate to spend £2,500 in a shoe shop
Because
in
they
Barbados?
can.
Or any shoe
I'd like to know
any shoe shop
why those shoes were bought and who they were bought
Yeah,
for.
quite.
That's what I'd want
And
to
also,
know. There may be a reasonable explanation. I'm very sceptical. Because you can't buy them for your own use. You know, that's not allowed
also,
unless...
Who signed them off? Which minister signed all this off?
I know. Well, we'll be talking to the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, the government minister of the day, in about an hour and a half.
Yeah, but hang on, I've got more
Have
examples.
you got more? See, she's got her teeth sunk into this.
And he of all people... You're talking to Pat McFadden?
He's notoriously frugal.
He is.
I mean,
So he'll take a very dim... He'll take a dim view of this.
I bet you the whole government machine is... I'm glad it's Pat McFadden
And just in case viewers don't know, when the government's in a sticky spot over any argument, they send out Pat McFadden because he's seen as someone who is very knowledgeable and plays everything with a straight bat. So we'll look forward to talking to him later on and asking him why £80,000 was spent on redecorating the Downing Street media room.
That was staggering.
Because it was too blue.
Yeah.
So this is the before, and there's the after.
Oh, worth every penny, Susanna, come on.
I mean, £80,000.
They panelled it, didn't they, effectively?
I mean, that is
80 grand for a bit of
staggering
paint.
amount of money.
No, I don't think it is paint. That looks like wood panelling.
This is the...
How many nurses would that pay for?
This is
been stained with
This is the centre that Johnson spent millions
4 million.
on creating. They also had to rip out the electrics because the Chinese had put... Some Chinese firm had put some of them in. They feared there might be bugging. But you can't just get any old decorator in because you've got to be security clear. But 80 grand. Did it need doing?
No.
Because you can change the colour with lights anyway.
Yeah, you can.
OK. Can I just put the other side to you, Andrew? When they got things for free, you had a go at them. So
I did.
what's the best way for the government to get around this? Because if they spend money on things, we have a go at them. And if they get things for free, we have a go at them.
Everything is in proportion. Spend it proportionately and moderately.
When you pick up your prescription, how often do you actually read all of the side effects on the leaflet that's inside the box? Well, after going to her GP for restless leg syndrome, very common condition, it's a nervous system condition which charities estimate affects 1 in 10 people in the UK, Sue here was prescribed dopamine agonist drugs, which can have a number of side effects, including compulsive behaviour.
The first drug Sue was given helped initially, but when her restless leg symptoms returned, she was prescribed a second drug, and it is called Peril. And despite telling her doctor that she had started to gamble more, she was given this prescription, and that gambling quickly spiralled out of control. And she found herself in debt to the tune of £80,000.
Well, she later came off Peril after realising the devastating impact it was having on her life. And since then, she's received an out-of-court settlement of, would you believe, £70,000. Now, Sue joins us now alongside Dr Julian Spinks, the chairman of Restless Leg Syndrome UK. This is a fascinating story. I mean, basically, until you went onto this drug, the only gambling that you'd ever done in your life was the odd flutter on the Grand National.
It was, absolutely.
That was it?
Yeah, absolutely.
You were not a gambler?
I was not a gambler. I had a great interest in sports.
OK.
And I'd previously worked for a horse race owner, so I liked the sport, but I'd never gambled except for the Grand National.
Just the Grand National?
Just the Grand National.
How soon after you went on this drug did you start to get this urge to gamble?
After the first drug, I had some impulse control, not necessarily gambling. I was sort of doing impulsive things, maybe saying impulsive things. Then we had a Grand National party with the kids in our house one Saturday afternoon with some friends, and we did well. We won, and it was like, oh, this is great. And the regularity started first. Before the quantity of money, it was the regularity. I started doing it sort of every other day, then it was every day. Then Saturday is obviously a big sport day. I'd do more, but it was all about sport.
Was this online gambling? Or
it was all online. No, it was all online. It was so easy.
Yeah.
Let's face it, it's so easy. The problem started for me is when I went on the second drug.
Rapinirole.
On Rapinirole.
And if you had opened up the packet and taken out the patient safety leaflet and had a read of it, it would have said that this is one of the side effects.
I believe so, yes.
But, of course, it would have been listed in a whole load of side effects, and you might have thought, well, it's not going to happen to me.
Exactly, yeah.
What did happen then? How bad did it get?
Well, lockdown happened for me, unfortunately, for all of us, but lockdown for me was because I couldn't work, as so many people couldn't, and I sort of lost my way a little bit. But the sport stopped. But my need to gamble on these second tablets, on the Rapinirole, had heightened enormously. So I looked for other avenues to gamble. So I found online casinos, and it was finding the online casinos that really, really crucified us.
These are ones where you can place a bet before you go to sleep.
Yes,
and the bets spin through.
You can leave it to spin
while
for 25.
Sleeping. You wake up to see if you won or not.
Absolutely, but I didn't sleep, so I'd go 24 hours without sleeping.
Did at any point, given that you'd never had this problem, this addiction to gambling before, did at any point, did you kind of step back from yourself and think, whoa, what's happening here? Why am I doing this?
There were very few moments of clarity. When I got them, it could be 30 seconds, it could be a minute, it could be 2 minutes. But I almost dismissed them because my need to gamble and my want to gamble was so high that I dismissed the moments of clarity, because if I'd have thought very clearly in those moments, I'd have probably had to stop gambling, and I didn't want to at that time. I was a different person.
Once you came off Rapinirole, what happened?
Well, I came off Rapinirole cold turkey, and I don't recommend it to anybody. It was horrific. But my GP had recommended I go to a drug and alcohol withdrawal centre to come off them, and that's not something I wanted to do. When I came off them, it was fairly instantaneous. I'd say a week to a month that the compulsions had gone completely.
Wow.
Yeah, it was.
Dr. Julian Spinks, you are a GP, not Sue's GP, but you're a GP, and you are chairman of Restless Leg Syndrome UK. There might be people saying to the television, you can't blame this kind of behaviour on a particular drug, but you can.
Well, you can. It's a group of drugs called dopamine agonists. Dopamine is a chemical which is to do with movement, which is why it's used to treat restless leg syndrome, but it's also a part of the brain process that says that something is nice and that you want to do it again. And what it does is turbocharge that effect. So something where you would just normally say, yes, I'll do that occasionally, it's pushing you further and further forward, and we're hearing more and more people coming forward.
So this story is not unusual?
It is not unusual.
It's likely that there'll be people watching this right now who are on this drug. It's also known, by the way, as Requip. That's what it's sold under. So if you're on that, then that's what we're talking about. They may be thinking, my God, this is me.
Yes, and I don't blame people. I'm a diabetic, and I suddenly thought when I opened up my tablets today that I took the pack leaflet and threw it in the bin. And so people don't read that. As a GP, it is very difficult to keep up to date with everything and know everything that's happening with every drug. And until very recently, this group of drugs were the first-line drug to treat RLS. So not surprisingly, GPs were giving it to patients. But with side effects, we really should be discussing with patients the risks of drugs as well as the benefits, because that then allows the person to make a decision.
How many people who take this drug are at risk of this side effect?
Depending on the research, it's between 6 and 20%.
Wow.
So at the upper end, 1 in 5 people.
Wow.
The lower end, 1 in 20. Anything above 1 in 100 as a GP is supposed to be considered to be a common side effect.
If you were to tell a patient who you prescribe this drug to for the first time, look, this might happen to you, and you give them a graphic warning, and those effects do take hold, is knowing that in advance enough to allow them to defend themselves against the impulse?
It at least informs them so they get an idea when this is starting to happen, rather than getting on to a point where you're massively in debt and having to withdraw cold turkey. And I certainly wouldn't recommend cold turkey.
OK, and if you do suffer from restless leg syndrome, which makes your legs feel crawly and like you can't lie down, it particularly affects you when you're trying to go to sleep.
Yes,
it can be very
Absolutely.
distressing and deprive you of sleep. You want to get up and move around. But what would you suggest? just to point out, by the way, most people who use this drug won't be affected in this way.
Yes.
But if people feel that they are and they want an alternative, what would you say?
Well, there are alternatives, and they've now moved up to first line. There's a group called alpha-2 ligands, pregabalin, gabapentin, and also very low-dose opioids. All of those are available, but the GPs often don't know about it.
Well, listen, GSK, who make Ropinirole, sold as I said, Requip, said to us that more than 17 million patient treatments worldwide since 1996, they say, have continued to show Requip to be an effective treatment for Parkinson's disease and restless leg syndrome. They say that, as with all medicines, Requip has potential side effects, and those are clearly stated in the prescribing information that comes with the drug.
And if you have been affected by that issue or any of the issues we discuss on the programme, you can find advice and support at itv.com/helplines. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you so much.
And sharing your experience.
Appreciate
As we
the time.
say,
Thank
obviously,
you.
most people won't be affected in this way, but for those who are,
Up to
We
one in
want
five.
people to be aware.
Up to one in five,
Absolutely.
yeah.
exactly right.
A timely warning. Thank you very
Absolutely.
much
Thank
indeed
you
for
so
that.
much.
Thousands of civil service credit cards are set to be cancelled, cut in half, as part of efforts to reduce government spending, after it was revealed that more than £675 million was spent using them in the last year alone, and many of the purchases made by civil servants are little short of outrageous. Cardholders will be needing to justify their need to use one, or they're going to be revoked.
The announcement comes as the government prepares to announce drastic cuts to disability benefits. Of course, we've heard about the opposition from a number of Labour MPs and campaigners. Joining us now, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, Pat McFadden. I introduced you earlier as saying that if the government's in a sticky spot, they send out Pat McFadden because you always play a straight bat and knock everything else out of the way. So, big day today. We finally find out what you're going to do with PIP, what you're going to do with cuts to disability benefits for the most severely disabled, amongst others, very concerned. What can you tell us?
This is an important challenge facing the country. We'll always want a welfare state that's there for people who need it, but the United Kingdom has been an outlier in recent years. We are the only major industrialised country that has a lower proportion of people in work now compared to before the pandemic. We've got an increasing number of people going on to long-term sickness benefits. It's 2.8 million at the moment. That number is projected to grow to 4.3 million by the end of the decade if we don't do anything. The numbers of people applying have been accelerating, and it's really important for any government to face up to big challenges facing the country and to make sure that the welfare state, and this particular part of it, which is welfare benefits for people with sickness and disability, is fit for the future, there for those who need it, but with support there also for people who could work if given the chance.
OK, look, Pat McFadden, we know that this is the message that's been going out pretty much every day, but the key concern is, I would say, two issues. One is for those who are most severely disabled, who simply cannot work at all. The other is for people who might want to work, but for whom there is no employment. And the third is for PIP claimants who might be working anyway, and a good number of them are, but the reason people claim PIP is because they're disabled and their costs are higher than for other people. Can you reassure those three groups?
Well, you've issued three different questions there. Let me deal with them. For people who can never work, who've got a condition which is never going to get better and might in some cases be a degenerative condition where it might get worse over time, of course support is there and the system should recognise they can never work.
Okay.
That will be, that's there and that will remain there for the future.
OK, that for people is reassuring and sounds like a done deal.
Yeah, well, look, wait for what the Secretary of State announces later today, but for people who cannot work, of course support must be there. Now, for people who could work, one of the things that we've announced is that people can try work. If it doesn't work out, then they can go back to the benefits they were on, because one of the disincentives at the moment is people go through a lot of forms and assessment and process, and then when they get there, there's they're a bit scared of trying work because they think if it doesn't work out, I'll be back to square one. So that was announced at the weekend. But it's also important to remember here, there are 200,000 of the 2.8 million I mentioned who said already that they would work right now, even with no further changes. We believe that that number can go up if we can get the right support in place. So we want to get the support in place for those who could work in the future.
All right.
And on PIP, which I think was the third group that you mentioned, there are 1,000 new people a day applying for this. The profile of conditions that people are applying for it has changed over the years. We've got a duty to make sure that the system looks at how these benefits are allocated and also doesn't always assume that every condition is permanent for the future.
Okay.
All right, Mr McFadden. OK, thank you for those answers to a triple question there. Can we move on to this question of credit cards? I have to tell you that our viewers who are in receipt of benefit and have been simmering about the prospect of these cuts that we'll hear about later today have now boiled over when they've heard of the kind of purchases that are being made on civil servants' credit cards, which, of course, is spending our money, spending taxpayers' money. We've heard about luxury shoes being bought in Barbados, for example. We've heard of other expenditure, which just seems to baffle people. I mean, it wouldn't be a surprise to see a claim for old rope being made on one of these credit cards, hence money for old rope. How bad would you accept the problem has become of the misuse of government credit cards?
Well, that's why I've called a halt to this. Expenditure on these cards has quadrupled in recent years. There's 20,000 of them in circulation, and some of the examples which you've read out were brought to my attention, and I said we've got to change this system. So what we've done is we've suspended these cards, except in some very limited circumstances for people working in conflict areas overseas and so on. The people who have them, everybody's going to have to reapply to justify it. I think we'll see the number issued drastically cut in future. We're also going to reduce the expenditure limit on them from £2,500 to £500 because it is taxpayers' money and it's important that it's treated with respect.
They've been taking the proverbial, haven't they?
Well, anything which has quadrupled in expenditure in recent years should beg the question. And it was brought to my attention. I've acted on it. I've suspended these, and I'm going to make sure that in the future, anyone who needs one has to reapply for it, and it's got to be authorised.
Do we know what these luxury shoes that were bought in Barbados, hundreds and hundreds of pounds spent on shoes?
£2,500?
Yeah, £2.5 grand. Why? Do you know why?
No, I don't. And it's because of lines of expenditure like that being drawn to my attention that I've said we need to change this. And that's what we're going to do, and that's the change that I've announced today.
What about the redecoration of the media room to make it look less blue? That was £80,000. Our Laura Tobin's just finished repainting the inside of her house. I'm sure she could do it for less than 80 grand.
Get Laura around. Get Laura involved. She sounds like she could do a good job.
No, but seriously, 80 grand to make a room a bit less blue. It's outrageous, isn't it?
Well, look, you know, the expenditure on the room was a great deal more, I think, in the last under the last government.
Oh, don't play that card. No, come on, let's talk about this expenditure. Never mind the last government. Can you justify 80 grand on de-bluing a room?
Look, the room is there for media purposes. It needs some expenditure on it. Maybe we could have got Laura around at a cheaper cost, but we'll always take care to have value for money in the expenditure that we made. And that's why I've announced.
What about Lisa
That's why I've
Nandy's...
announced this change on credit cards.
What about Lisa Nandy's department spending almost £1,200 on 2 leather folders, cost of nearly £600 each, could have been bought for 30 quid in the Commons shop?
Well, these folders are they're part of a long-term government contract. I suspect Lisa had nothing to do personally with that expenditure. The department issues these. They always have done to ministers. One thing to take a little bit of care of here in the questions is not to make sure that this government is judged by a different standard to its predecessors. Every minister for many, many years is issued with red boxes to keep their papers secure. That's true of this government, been true of the last government. Those boxes are expensive. They're important for security. Look, I think ministers do take care with expenditure. That's why I've announced the change that we are making today.
£600 for a leather... Look, I use a folder, and if I was asked to pay £600 for it, I'd say I'm going to another shop. I mean, it's outrageous. It's you can't justify it.
Look, there'll be a long-term contract in place for these folders. I doubt Lisa had anything to do with the decision, and they've been issued to ministers for a long, long time.
All right, Pat McFadden, we must let you go. Thank you very much indeed.
Nearly £17 billion is still needed to bring roads in England and Wales up to what's described as their ideal condition. And that's a far cry from the £1.6 billion currently allocated by the government for repairs. That's roughly £15 billion short.
But with recent cuts to the winter fuel allowance and, of course, expected cuts to welfare benefits, should we prioritise pothole repair? The actor, Nigel Havers, says, for goodness sake, yes, potholes affect people's everyday lives. He's been directly impacted. While criminal justice academic Ruan Udawarege Pereira thinks politicians should focus on issues like deprivation, crime and health instead. Very good morning to you both.
Morning.
Nigel Havers.
Good morning.
How many cars have you lost to potholes?
I've lost a car. I've always lost my life. I mostly drive a motorbike, and it's really, really dangerous if you're on a motorbike. I'm talking about prioritise. This is not about prioritising. It's about government failure. Every pothole is a government failure. And every government, past governments included, of course, fail to fix the roads. We pay a road tax, which goes up and up and up. Where does the money go? It doesn't go in fixing the road. That's why we pay a road tax.
What's your diagnosis as to why things have got so bad?
Really bad government. Heidi Alexander, I hope you're listening to this. She's the Secretary of State for Transport. What is she doing about it? Have you heard what she has to say?
What do you say to those, and we're going to come to this point in a moment with our other guest, who say, well, hang on just a minute, potholes, yes, they're a problem, but there are bigger priorities. There are other areas where we should be spending public money.
It's not about that, Richard. You know that, I know that. It's about good government. It's about working out what to do with all the money that we, the taxpayer, give the government. And they waste. And let's look at what they waste, shall we? Before we start sort of saying, well, they should prioritise. Let's cut out the waste. Government constantly wastes money. It's time they stopped doing that and actually worked out how to deal with a whole range of issues, which are really important. And you can't say potholes are not, because of course they are. They're really vital. People get killed because of it. People get injured because of it. That only makes more for the national health. I could go on and on, but I mean, come on, get a grip.
Nigel, can you just explain, when you're on your motorbike, just describe the experience of being on a potholed road?
Well, you have to avoid them, otherwise I'll come off the bike. And avoiding them means you might swerve into a car coming the other way, or, I mean, it's really, really dangerous. And they, you know, I know the Romans built roads better than we do now. Actually, I think as a country, we've lost the will to build. I mean, look at Hammersmith Bridge. You know, it's still closed because the government don't sort it out.
What happened to the car that you lost because of potholes?
Well, it was an old classic car, and I broke the back frame just went, snapped in two.
Yeah, so it's literally cost you, and you're worried for your own life. I mean, I know when I'm driving and cyclists try and move out of the way of the potholes locally, it feels very risky. Ruan, you are an expert in policing, in criminology and in justice. Therefore, you think that money could be better spent elsewhere, and we're all obsessed with potholes to the detriment of other things. But do you not understand Nigel's point? These are risky roads we're driving on and operating on.
I live in the Highlands of Scotland, but I actually work in the East End of London. And where I live, the potholes are absolutely diabolical. Sutherland is well known for terrible roads. I am not diminishing anything Nigel has actually said there. But I'm coming back to what potholes have become a political game around election time, where you've in fact got a picture of me when I was a councillor kneeling beside a pothole to win people's support. Now, did I then change? Was my first priority potholes Thank you for putting it up. I look a lot younger though. Was my first priority in the council to fix the potholes? Well, no, it wasn't, alas. It was other factors, finding cuts, getting savings, etc., and trying to find further resources. So I'm not diminishing what Nigel has said at all. I mean, the UK's potholes are basically a metaphor for how government is dealing with public services. And I think Nigel will probably agree with that. We hastily patch things up in the cheapest means possible. And then literally days later, the pothole, the metaphorical pothole, a real pothole, is now reopened again and causes all the damage that Nigel has highlighted.
But surely you'd agree that safe, drivable roads are a fundamental basic of a modern civilised society. We've never had problems like this before. I mean, I'm 69 nearly, and I've been driving for over half a century, and I've never known it like this. And I've never known potholes on motorways. And there are potholes on motorways now.
Again, I'm not going to disagree with you. I'm saying that the problem is wider than just potholes. Potholes, to me, are the metaphor for the breakdown that we've seen with public services. We must reinvest in the road structure, the infrastructure of the UK. Our economy is dependent on it. But equally, we've got to be investing in the human resources that we have, i.e. the public, their health and well-being. It's interesting, Dr. Hillary was on just a few minutes ago, and he talks about that solution-oriented, a proactive health and well-being approach to tackling problems. That is where I'm coming from. We must be seeking a more we've got to be seeking innovation on how we change this. Yeah. We can't simply be going back, pulling a bucket load of asphalt in a hole, as I will be watching over the next couple of weeks in the Stratford that I live in. Yeah. Only for that to, by the end of the summer, it's all gone again.
Rowan, you referenced the fact that you used to be a Lib Dem member who campaigned on issues like potholes. You wrote an article in The Sun 12 years ago. Can anyone explain the Lib Dem obsession with potholes, was the title of your article. Are we getting our priorities right when we establish major campaigns over such mind-numbing issues? Should we seriously be spending such disproportionate effort, resource and irreplaceable time on such comparative trivia when all it exposes is the pettiness of local politics? Nigel, presumably your answer would be yes.
I just don't understand people. I just don't get it. That I'm not a politician, but I do know that, if you're going to waste a whole load of money on HS2 or whatever it is, just think about that. Government completely messing that about when they could have been spending the money on fixing the roads. That's just one thing that they wasted huge amount of money on. Now, we're a small island. We depend on communication, getting things from A to B. If you don't fix the roads properly, we're all going to be stuffed. So let's get a grip, government. I'm not saying it's this government, it's every government. They haven't got a clue how to run the roads and the transport system here. So come on, get a move on.
Nigel and Rowan, thank you both very much indeed. You asked if we'd asked the Department of Transport for a response, and we have one. They're investing £1.6 billion to help local authorities resurface local roads and fix the equivalent of up to 7 million extra potholes over the next financial year. But we've just heard that 17 billion is what's required. So that leaves a big hole of 15 billion.
We're 34th. We're third in the best roads in Europe. We're number 34. How about that?
Thank you both very much indeed. And we asked the audience, should we prioritise potholes? And here is the result. 62% said yes. Let's spend the money.